After a number of years at Freedom House, an opportunity came along to go directly to the directorship of one of America's most beloved international institutions that's been around since World War II, Voice of America. Why did you make this shift from Freedom House to running Voice of America?
Simply put, Rob, the mission of Voice of America really inspired me. Voice of America, as you noted, was founded during the World War II era, and it really kind of made a name for itself uh, as a place that broadcasts truthful, objective information to people living in tyranny. So people living, for instance, behind the Iron Curtain during the Cold War or in China. I mean, I'm still struck by during Tiananmen Square, the head of our China division was a student there and saw firsthand how the students who were protesting the Chinese Communist Party's actions, she was inspired. You know, they passed around the reports of VOA to get the actual information that they could not get from their own government. I still believe that function is very important, but I think there's also, you know, as you know, in the last 30 years, well, 40 years really, since the end of the Cold War, the whole global architecture has changed, both politically and as well as in terms of information. And what we see now is countries that are inimical to United States interests, China in particular, Iran would be another. They are so flooding the zone with what I think would traditionally be called propaganda. And I think VOA has a very relevant ongoing role to basically combat that propaganda all around the world. We don't broadcast in the United States, but all around the world with truthful, objective information. That's a very inspiring mission, I still think.
So, what's your answer to the critique that says, yeah, the other guy broadcasts propaganda, but when it's our government, it's independent, truthful information? Isn't it also US government produced? Isn't that almost the definition of propaganda?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, I certainly can see why in some parts of the world people would perceive that. But I think one thing that's very interesting to me is we do regular audience surveys around the world about trust in Voice of America. And we find that 80 to 90% of our listeners, our viewers, people who come to us on digital, have a lot of trust in our broadcast, in our information. And one reason they have trust in us is they actually know that we're not propaganda. You know, what other government funded institution would have on its TV shows or on its broadcasts people who are critical of their own government? During the run up to the election, we had a talk show in Mandarin that was broadcast inside China. We try to get around the different firewalls and the censorship regimes, but we had someone who was supporting Donald Trump and we had someone who was supporting President Biden, and they, for an hour in Mandarin, had a very respectful conversation about what U.S.-China relations would look like whoever was elected president. That is not a conversation that anybody in China would get from China State TV. And we know that hundreds of thousands of people, influential people in China, saw that debate because one of the people on the debate subsequently went to China and gave a speech at a university, and then people came up to him and said, "Hey, we saw you on TV." That's amazing. And I think that's VOA at its best. And that's why I really push back gently. One thing that's very interesting, Rob, is that in the Voice of America Charter, we are obligated to present all sides of public issues, and we are obligated to provide responsible debate about U.S. policy positions. So we're not out there just saying that what the U.S. government did is all good or all bad. We are providing reasoned discussion and debate about these issues, which I think very few news organizations in the world, even in the private sector, often do.
Want to improve what we can do. And you could wave a magic wand. What would be an improvement in America's engagement and pursuit of freedom and openness around the world that you would recommend to the powers that be?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm very sad that it's been approached this way. I have been the head of Voice of America for nearly a year. And honestly, it's a very large, complex institution. And it took me a while to kind of get to know it. And I believe that that it should not be thrown out completely. I think that anyone who's been involved with the U.S. government can tell you that, yes, there are mistakes we've made. Yes, there are problems. But I think these are all addressable. And even like one of the big critiques from Congress, from some sources, that they believe that parts of VOA are biased, just like other news organizations. But no other news organization has a law that requires you to be balanced. And I think one thing that could be done is to set up some kind of review board to really do an objective analysis of VOA coverage. I think that would have been very helpful. I tried to do that on a smaller scale when I was at VOA. I was interested, for instance, in our coverage of the Middle East and how balanced it was. And generally, people came back and said, this is pretty solid. I'm not saying, again, some people had critiques of it. That's the nature of the game. But I think we could have addressed the concern about bias. I still think we can. And I think that I do hope that the administration and Congress will agree eventually to have some form of VOA, even if it's smaller, even if it's not as ambitious, because I think this is an incredibly important asset for the United States to really influence the debate in the rest of the world. And I think at a certain point, people in the administration and people in Congress will, I think, understand that.